Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective. This is Think Design Stories. In this series, we will be going behind the scenes on one of the most iconic laptop brands ever conceived and is still going strong. Today I am joined by David Hill, who started with IBM in 1985 and was with them until May 2005 when the IBM ThinkPad division was purchased by Lenovo. Since then, David has held several positions between those two companies, including the Executive Director of Design, the Vice President of Corporate Identity and Design, and the Chief Design Officer and Vice President of Experience Design. When it comes to ThinkPads, there are few people that know more than he does. ThinkPads over the last 30 years have built a reputation for being durable and reliable. Even in the early days, this was an established feature, but what many might not know is that there were plans to push that durability to new heights. David Hill shares the story of a concept developed by Richard Sapper that sought to do just that.
So this really started in, I believe it was about 1995, and I had just taken over the responsibility for the design of all of IBM's personal computer products. And Richard, I felt, was not being used to the best extent. He had obviously done a huge amount of work on the design of ThinkPad, and he was somewhat frustrated by trying to steer the design of PCs, and there were a lot of bumps along the road. And I also felt that there wasn't enough of a focus on future concepts for ThinkPad or desktops or whatever they might be. So I wanted to kind of light a fire under that. So at the time, there was a lot of discussion about ThinkPad and its ruggedness. And, basically you could take a competitor product and beat a ThinkPad with it, and the ThinkPad would still work, and the competitor would be broken into a million pieces. But there was always discussion about, well, should we make something that's even more robust to, market to, the military, policemen, construction workers, oil field drillers, whatever it might be, that need to work remotely, but they literally had to either stake their lives or their job, on this laptop. So I talked to Richard about this idea, and I said, there's a lot of things that happen to a ThinkPad to make them more robust. Things like the hinges are metal, and the way the lid fits together, and all these kind of things, but they're kind of subtle, and it's mostly the engineers who work on it who know about these things. And I said, it'd be interesting if we could come up with a concept for a hardened ThinkPad that when you looked at it, you said, whoa, what's that? And he was very intrigued with that. And so I really kind of was hands off, because I always felt that, if you try to steer him, at least initially, you're sort of defeating the purpose. Why would you hire Mies van der Rohe to design a building and then tell him how to do it? It's kind of crazy. So he went off, and he called me on the phone one day and said, what should I base this on? What computer? Because I have this idea of adding something to it. And because it must be very expensive to make a from scratch computer. And, maybe we should start with a base. And so at the time, the thinnest ThinkPad we had was the 560, which was, I don't know, about this thick. And so he wanted one. So I, sent him a ThinkPad 560, and then he kind of worked on this by himself. And then we had a meeting in Raleigh, and he had a suitcase which appeared to be much heavier than normal. with him. And I said, "What's in the suitcase?" And he said, "It's a surprise for you." So, okay. So I go in my office and he takes this thing out. It was wrapped up in a towel. And he unwrapped it. And here was this gleaming ThinkPad model, which was about as thick as, I'm going to say it's maybe 70 millimeters thick, maybe 50, 60, somewhere in there. But about almost, not less than, it's not as twice as thick as the 560, but kind of close. And I said, "Okay, you're going to have to explain this. What am I looking at?" And he said, "Well, I figured that what you needed to have was some cushioning. So I put 10 millimeters of cushioning all around the entire thing. So the 560 is floating inside of a foam, rubber, isolated, sort of cushioned environment. And then the skin itself is stainless steel, like a DeLorean car."
Mm.
And I looked at it and said, "Wow," because it's very striking when you see this. And he said, "Well, be careful. This is a model and it's machined out of a solid block," because there was no way that he could, make a thin, aluminum or a thin stainless steel skin. So he literally had a model maker machine this out of a block of metal. And then he put the 560 inside of it. And then there was an area that was black to sort of simulate the foam. And it was striking, to say the least. There were also a few doors on the sides that sort of hinged down to expose the connectors. But when you closed it, it was a completely sealed stainless steel billet. I don't know how else to describe it. And it got a lot of traction because it was kind of a completely different idea. If you look, at most products that people try to do things like that too, they put big metal corners on boxes, and they use all kinds of lumps and bumps and surface articulation that makes it look like a Jerry gas can or these sorts of very utilitarian objects. And he was completely against that it should have still the same sort of essence of a ThinkPad of being simple, but it's a ThinkPad like you've never seen before. And we had to be very, very careful with this model because there was no friction on the hinge, because it was purely a big block of metal and it was extremely heavy. So when you opened it, if you let go of it, it would just slam shut. It would cut your fingers off if you had them inside of the thing, So we had to be very, very careful showing this to anyone. No, let me show you. Don't touch it, and this kind of thing. Well, unfortunately, it never really went anywhere because it was viewed at the time that the investment to make this maybe wasn't really worth it. They didn't quite know where the market was, but it was a forward-looking idea. And the funny thing is, the basic shape of it is almost exactly that of the first Apple notebook that was made out of the aluminum. It had an aluminum skin. It was wide aspect ratio. It's basically that form, only it's made from stainless, or intended to be made from stainless. It's much thicker because it has another computer inside of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, the idea of having the computer essentially sit inside and float in it, I think would have been a really brilliant idea, because if anything were to happen to the outside chassis, you would potentially just be able to replace the chassis
Exactly.
when it got too damaged, and then the rest of the computer would be fine. And that would probably be lower cost once you figured out tooling and how you'd manufacture the stainless steel.
Right, yeah. And it was supposed to be a skin, like, I don't remember, 1.5 millimeters thick, and this high density sort of cushioning foam. It's still around. It's at the Lenovo Design Center, and every once in a while somebody looks at it. It's a little bit hard to look at now because it's so thick,
Mm.
Well, if you wanted to make one today, it would be, an inch thick. It would be that bad. It might even be less than an inch. I'm not sure. It depends how much cushioning you used and such. But the computer is so much thinner.
Yeah, and the average computer can also handle just a lot more shock
Yes.
as well. Like you don't have as many physical mechanical parts reading and writing data to disks, so you could probably get away with it.
Yeah, you don't have any spinning media.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it was a great exercise, and it stimulated a lot of creativity, and a lot of ideas sort of came out of it. We actually ended up using metal on the Z series, the first Z series. It had a titanium option for the top surface, and some good thinking came out of it. It was a little disappointing. We never, took it to the finish line, because I thought it was really cool, and I thought that maybe there's a market for this, but we just couldn't get the traction on it. Really interesting, because you can see the edge around the perimeter of the stainless, and then you can see the black surrounding that. When you open it, it's really kind of interesting, because it's a little bit like a DeLorean car, that is stainless on the outside, but it's black on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
It's a neat kind of contrast. But yeah, I mean, he felt that the ThinkPad itself was fine. It was actually very rugged and very durable, and the hinges worked and all this kind of stuff. But hey, if you want to take it to the next level, let's put it in a box that's impenetrable. I still think it was a good idea.
No, definitely. And if you didn't need it that particular day, you just take it out. Right. It's not one of those things where you're buying it all built in and that's the way it always will be. And there might be instances where having that extra weight is problematic, or you don't need it every day.
Yeah, if you're going to use it on an oil rig, in the middle of the ocean somewhere, you don't necessarily care that it's a little bit thicker, a little bit heavier, as long as it works.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also, I think, his idea that it had like an O-ring seal. So when you closed it, it was watertight. It was a cool thing. But I was always worried someone would pick it up and drop it on their toe, or something like this. I actually think YY saw it one time, and he started to pick it up, and I just had to grab it, keep him away from it. I thought, oh my goodness. And so we kind of avoided that one.